Dust swirled around the worn boots of Jedediah Red McCready, an outlaw whose reputation preceded him like the buzz of flies around a carcass. He stood on the dusty outskirts of Harmony Creek, a town that lived up to its name with a saccharine sweetness that always left a bitter taste in Red's mouth. The sun beat down with the unforgiving intensity of a desert hawk, baking the clapboard buildings and the single, dusty street until they shimmered in the heat haze. Red wasn't in Harmony Creek for harmony. He was there for the First National Bank, a squat brick building at the end of Main Street that held the promise of enough cash to keep him and his dwindling gang fed and watered for a good long while. Their last few scores had been lean, and the Pinkertons were breathing down their necks with the persistence of bloodhounds. He'd sent 2 of his men, a couple of greenhorns named Billy and Finn, ahead to scout the layout. They were supposed to be back by now, their reports detailing the number of guards, the placement of the safe, the general level of alertness in this seemingly God-fearing town. The silence was starting to fray Red's nerves, a sensation akin to a loose tooth you couldn't stop worrying with. Harmony Creek was the kind of place Red usually avoided. Too clean, too quiet, too righteous. It was the kind of town where folks stared at you a little too long, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and judgment. But desperation had a way of overriding such sensibilities. As Red stood there, squinting against the glare, the sound of a commotion drifted from the center of town. It started as a raised voice, sharp and panicked, followed by a chorus of concerned murmurs. Red's hand instinctively drifted to the Colt Peacemaker holstered at his hip. Trouble, in his experience, was a universal language, easily understood even in the most pious of places. He moved cautiously towards the sound, keeping to the shadows of the few stunted trees that lined the edge of town. As he drew closer, the scene unfolded before him. A small crowd had gathered in front of the general store. At the center of the commotion stood a burly, red-faced man, his grip tight on the arm of a young woman. The woman was struggling, her face pale with fear, her eyes wide with distress. Red recognized her instantly from the crude sketches Billy had shown him. Sarah Jenkins, the preacher's daughter. Preacher Elijah Jenkins was the moral compass of Harmony Creek, a stern-faced man with a booming voice and a reputation for unwavering piety. His daughter, however, possessed a quiet beauty, with hair the color of spun gold and eyes as blue as the desert sky after a rainstorm. Red had seen her once or twice from a distance, tending the small flower garden in front of the whitewashed church. The burly man, whom Red recognized as Jedediah Thorne, a local rancher known for his short temper and heavy hand, was shouting accusations at Sarah. Red couldn't make out all the words, but the tone was menacing, filled with a possessive rage. Sarah was pleading with him, her voice trembling. "Let go of me, Jedediah. You have no right." "No right." Thorne roared, his grip tightening, causing Sarah to gasp in pain. "Your father owes me money, girl. A lot of money. And you're going to make sure I get it back." The crowd around them murmured their disapproval, but no one dared to intervene. Thorne was a powerful man in Harmony Creek, and fear held them back. Red felt a familiar surge of anger rise within him. He might be an outlaw, a man who lived outside the bounds of the law, but he had his own code, a twisted sense of honor that abhorred the strong preying on the weak. And there was something about Sarah Jenkins's desperate plea that resonated with a part of him he usually kept buried deep down. Without thinking, Red stepped out of the shadows, his presence immediately drawing the attention of the crowd. Thorne, his face contorted with rage, turned towards the newcomer, his grip on Sarah's arm momentarily loosening. "What in tarnation do you think you're doing, stranger?" Thorne snarled, his eyes narrowing. Red's dusty clothes and the twin Colts at his hips marked him instantly as an outsider, and likely trouble. Red's gaze was fixed on Thorne's hand clamped around Sarah's arm. "Let her go, mister," Red said, his voice low and dangerous, the easy drawl barely concealing the threat beneath. Thorne scoffed, tightening his grip again. Sarah cried out, "Stay out of this, outlaw. This ain't your concern." "It is now," Red replied, his hand hovering over the butt of his Colt. The air crackled with tension. The good citizens of Harmony Creek held their breath, witnessing a confrontation between their respected rancher and a notorious gunfighter. Thorne, despite his bluster, wasn't stupid. He recognized the look in Red's eyes, the coiled readiness of a man who had likely seen his share of violence. He also knew Red Macready's reputation. With a grunt of displeasure, Thorn shoved Sarah away from him. She stumbled back, clutching her arm, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a dawning sense of hope as she looked at Red. "This ain't over, girl," Thorn growled at Sarah, then turned his attention back to Red. "You're asking for trouble, stranger. This town ain't friendly to your kind." "Maybe not," Red said, his gaze never leaving Thorn. "But I don't take kindly to bullies." Thorn glared at Red for a long moment, his face a mask of fury. But something in Red's steady stance and the unwavering glint in his eyes gave him pause. With a final, muttered threat, Thorn turned and stomped away, disappearing into the crowd. Silence fell over the dusty street, broken only by Sarah's soft sobs. Red turned to her, his expression softening slightly. "You all right, miss?" Sarah looked up at him, her blue eyes filled with gratitude. Yes, thank you. You saved me." Red shrugged, feeling a strange discomfort at being called a savior. Just didn't seem right, a man handling a woman like that. Just then, the crowd parted, and a tall, gaunt man with a stern face and piercing eyes strode towards them. It was Preacher Elijah Jenkins, his face a thundercloud. He looked from his daughter to Red, his expression a complex mixture of relief and suspicion. "Sarah, what happened here?" Preacher Jenkins's voice boomed, drawing the attention of the entire town. Sarah, still shaken, recounted Thorn's accusations and his violent behavior. She then turned to Red, her voice filled with emotion. "This man, he helped me, Papa. He made Jedediah leave me alone." Preacher Jenkins's stern gaze turned to Red, his eyes scrutinizing the outlaw from head to toe. "Red Macready?" he asked, his voice heavy with disapproval. Red met the preacher's gaze unflinchingly. "That's right, preacher." A tense silence descended. The savior of the preacher's daughter was the very man whose name likely caused nightmares in the sleep of every law-abiding citizen in the territory. The irony hung heavy in the air of Harmony Creek. The outlaw had saved their beacon of virtue. The town was about to change, whether they liked it or not. The silence that followed Preacher Elijah Jenkins's pronouncement of Red Macready's name was thick with disbelief and a palpable unease. The good citizens of Harmony Creek, accustomed to sermons on morality and the predictable rhythm of their virtuous lives, now found themselves indebted to the very embodiment of sin and lawlessness. The man who had just defended their preacher's daughter was the same outlaw whose exploits were whispered around campfires and printed in sensationalized newspaper broadsheets. Preacher Jenkins's stern face remained a mask of conflicting emotions. Relief for his daughter warred with his deep-seated condemnation of Red's chosen path. He looked from Sarah's tear-streaked face to Red's stoic countenance, the reality of the situation a jarring dissonance in his ordered world. The townsfolk, emboldened by the preacher's presence and their collective numbers, began to murmur amongst themselves. Fear mingled with a grudging curiosity. They had always imagined Red Macready as a monstrous figure, a ruthless killer. The man standing before them, while undeniably rough and carrying the aura of danger, had just acted with a surprising degree of chivalry. "Why did you do it, Macready?" Preacher Jenkins finally asked, his voice still booming but tinged with a hesitant curiosity. "Why interfere in the affairs of this town?" Red's gaze flickered towards Sarah, a flicker of something unreadable in his usually hardened eyes. "Like I said, preacher, didn't seem right." He shrugged as if trying to downplay his actions. "Man shouldn't lay a hand on a woman like that." Sarah looked at Red, her blue eyes filled with a burgeoning gratitude that transcended his notorious reputation. In that moment, he wasn't Red Macready the outlaw. He was simply a man who had helped her when no one else dared to. Jedediah Thorn, who had been watching the exchange from the edge of the crowd, his face still flushed with anger, stepped forward again. "Don't let him fool you, preacher," Thorn spat, his voice laced with venom. "He's just looking for trouble. Outlaws like him don't do good deeds without a reason." Several townsfolk murmured their agreement, their ingrained distrust of anyone outside their community resurfacing. Red's reputation, it seemed, was a shadow that even a good deed couldn't entirely dispel. Preacher Jenkins held up a hand, silencing the growing unrest. We will not descend into accusations and conjecture. My daughter was in distress, and Mr. Macready intervened. For that, I am grateful. The words seemed to catch in his throat, as if the very act of uttering it was a betrayal of his principles. However, the preacher continued, his stern gaze returning to Red, your presence in Harmony Creek is still a matter of concern. You are a wanted man, Macready. Red nodded, his expression unchanging. That I am, preacher. I should arrest you, Preacher Jenkins stated, his voice heavy with the weight of his duty. A tense silence fell again. The townsfolk watched, their faces a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. Would their righteous preacher deliver the notorious outlaw into the hands of justice, even after he had saved his daughter? Sarah stepped forward, her voice surprisingly firm. Papa, please. He helped me. He didn't have to. Jedediah? He was hurting me. Preacher Jenkins looked at his daughter, his stern facade softening slightly at the distress in her eyes. He was torn between his duty to the law and his gratitude for the man who had come to his daughter's aid. Mr. Macready, the preacher said finally, his voice weary. I will not turn a blind eye to the law. But I also believe in divine intervention. Perhaps your presence here was for a reason. He paused, considering his words carefully. You have my gratitude for what you did for my daughter. However, I must ask you to leave Harmony Creek. Now. Red met the preacher's gaze, a hint of understanding in his eyes. He hadn't expected a hero's welcome, and he respected the preacher's difficult position. Fair enough, preacher, Red said, a wry smile playing on his lips. Just passing through anyway. But as Red turned to leave, Sarah stepped forward again, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. Wait! Red stopped, surprised. The townsfolk watched, their curiosity piqued. Sarah looked at Red, her blue eyes earnest. You're hurt. She had noticed the slight wince that had crossed his face when he had moved quickly to intervene. Red shrugged it off. Just a scratch, miss. But Sarah was insistent. Please, let me tend to it. Papa, surely we can offer him that much? Preacher Jenkins hesitated, his internal struggle evident on his face. The idea of offering aid to an outlaw was anathema to his principles, yet his daughter's plea held a certain undeniable logic. Just a bandage, the preacher conceded, his voice grudging. Then you must leave, Macready. Red nodded, a genuine, albeit fleeting, smile touching his lips. He had expected a noose, not a bandage, for his troubles. Sarah led Red to the small infirmary behind the church, her movements efficient and surprisingly gentle. As she cleaned and bandaged the shallow gunshot wound on his side, a souvenir from a recent run-in with a rival gang, a quiet conversation unfolded between them. Sarah asked him why he lived the life he did, her voice filled with a genuine curiosity rather than judgment. Red, surprisingly, found himself opening up to her in a way he hadn't with anyone before. He spoke of a harsh childhood, of circumstances that had pushed him outside the bounds of the law, of the constant struggle for survival in a world that seemed determined to crush him. Sarah listened intently, her blue eyes filled with a compassion that seemed to see beyond his outlaw persona to the wounded man beneath. She spoke of her faith, of the possibility of redemption, her words offering a glimmer of hope in the darkness that usually surrounded Red. By the time Sarah had finished tending to his wound, a strange sort of understanding had blossomed between them, an unlikely connection forged in the heat of a tense moment and nurtured by an unexpected vulnerability. When Red emerged from the infirmary, Preacher Jenkins was waiting for him, his face still stern but his eyes holding a flicker of something akin to contemplation. You have been shown kindness here, Macready, the preacher said, his voice softer now. Do not repay it with further trouble. Red met his gaze. I won't, preacher. You have my word. With a final nod to Sarah, a silent acknowledgement of the unexpected connection they had formed, Red Macready, the notorious outlaw, mounted his horse and rode out of Harmony Creek, leaving behind a town that would never quite be the same. The townsfolk watched him go, their perceptions subtly shifted. They had seen the outlaw's face up close, had witnessed his unexpected act of heroism, had seen the gentle way he had interacted with their preacher's daughter. The black and white lines of their moral code had blurred, replaced by shades of gray they had never considered before. Preacher Jenkins, too, was changed. The encounter with Red Macready had shaken his rigid beliefs, forcing him to confront the possibility that even the most hardened sinner might possess a spark of humanity. He saw the genuine gratitude in Sarah's eyes, the unexpected connection she had formed with the outlaw. In the days and weeks that followed Red's departure, Harmony Creek was different. The townsfolk talked about what had happened, their discussions ranging from condemnation to quiet admiration. They looked at each other with a newfound awareness of the complexities of human nature, the understanding that appearances could be deceiving. Jedediah Thorne, humbled by the public reprimand and perhaps a little unnerved by Red's intervention, became slightly less heavy-handed in his dealings. Sarah, emboldened by Red's unexpected defense and the connection they had shared, spoke more openly about compassion and understanding in her father's sermons, subtly challenging the town's rigid judgment. Harmony Creek, once a bastion of unwavering righteousness, had been touched by the unexpected grace of an outlaw's deed. The seeds of change had been sown, watered by a moment of unexpected heroism and nurtured by the quiet reflections of a town forced to confront the complexities of good and evil. The harmony of Harmony Creek would never be quite so simple again. It would be a harmony tempered by understanding, a righteousness seasoned with compassion, all thanks to the outlaw who saved the preacher's daughter.